Picture your kitchen tomorrow morning, empty. Not just your kitchen, every animal on the planet, gone. No dogs at the door, no birds outside the window, no cattle in the fields, no fish in the rivers, nothing. Just you, some plants, and a silence so complete it would feel like a physical weight pressing on your chest. How long would you survive? Most people answer this the same way. They say something like, I just switched to plants. Simple, right? Except there's a hidden catch buried in that plan, one that almost nobody thinks about until it's too late. You can't till soil without a draft animal. You can't cross a flooded river without one to carry you. And without insects doing the quiet, invisible work of pollination, half your crops fail before they even flower. This isn't some far-off hypothetical. It's the exact math your ancestors were running every single day for hundreds of thousands of years, long before spreadsheets, long before written numbers even existed. Their entire existence was one continuous negotiation with animals, and the terms of that negotiation were brutally simple. Depend on them or die. Here's where it gets interesting. Anthropologists have a concept called optimal foraging theory, and it explains something that seems irrational at first glance. Chasing a mammoth is dangerous. You could get gored, you could get trampled, you could spend 3 days tracking it and come home with nothing. Picking berries, by comparison, is safe and almost guaranteed. So why did early humans gamble on the mammoth? Because the math of survival isn't about safety, it's about return on investment. Researchers calculating the caloric return rate of ancient foraging strategies found that a single successful large-game kill could deliver, per hour of effort, dramatically more usable energy than an entire day spent gathering roots and tubers. One 3-hour hunt could outproduce 2 full days of foraging. Your ancestors weren't reckless. They were running a brutally efficient cost-benefit analysis with their own lives as the currency, and the math kept pointing toward meat. And meat mattered for a reason most people never connect to their own skulls. Your brain, the exact one you're using to process this sentence right now, is a calorie-devouring machine. Sitting perfectly still, doing nothing physically demanding at all, it still burns through roughly a fifth of your entire daily energy budget. Building an organ that expensive and keeping it running required a fuel source dense enough to justify the cost. Plants alone couldn't do it. The seasonal, low-fat, unpredictable nature of foraged food simply didn't have the caloric horsepower. So, here's the paradigm shift worth sitting with. The expansion of the human brain, the very thing that separates you from every other species on Earth, didn't happen in spite of hunting. It happened because of it. Every strategic risk your ancestors took, chasing something faster, stronger, and more dangerous than themselves, was quietly rewiring the most complex object in the known universe, 3 pounds at a time. Now think about what happened after the kill. This is the part almost nobody pictures correctly. Movies show a hunter dragging a carcass home, eating and walking away. In reality, that would have been an unthinkable waste, the ancient equivalent of setting money on fire while living paycheck to paycheck. Every single piece of that animal had a job to do, and understanding those jobs is like discovering a hidden operating manual for early civilization. Start with the bones. Cracked open, they release marrow, one of the richest, most calorie-dense substances found anywhere in nature. Think of it as the ancient world's version of high-octane fuel, except your ancestors weren't refining it in a lab. They were smashing it open with a rock. Evidence of this practice stretches back staggeringly far, long before humans had anything resembling sophisticated tools, which tells you something important. This wasn't a clever innovation. It was a desperate foundational necessity discovered almost immediately. Then there's the hide. This is clothing. This is shelter. This is the difference between surviving a northern winter and freezing solid in it. Leaves don't insulate. Bark doesn't trap body heat. Only fur and hide, properly treated, could do that job. And your ancestors figured this out with a level of precision modern people wrapped in synthetic parkas rarely appreciate. Sinew and tendon became rope and bowstring, and that single conversion set off a chain reaction. No sinew meant no functioning bow. No bow meant a drastically shorter hunting range. A shorter range meant fewer opportunities to secure food. one material quietly determining the outer limits of an entire group's survival. Even the stomach and bladder had a purpose. Filled with water, they became portable containers. Drop in heated stones and suddenly you have a cooking vessel, a genuinely clever piece of ancient engineering built entirely from biological materials. Bones became needles, hooks, and blades. Stone tools tend to dominate museum displays and documentaries, but bone tools were arguably just as revolutionary, and they're chronically underappreciated. And then there's the piece almost everyone forgets entirely: fat, rendered down and burned in simple lamps. Without it, darkness was absolute the moment the sun dropped below the horizon. No planning, no storytelling, no early forms of art or social organization could happen in total blackness. In a very real sense, animal fat was the first artificial light source humanity ever had, the ancestor of every bulb glowing above your head right now. Even manure played its part once agriculture began taking hold. It replenished nutrients in soil that would otherwise exhaust itself within a few growing seasons, meaning the humble, unglamorous byproduct of digestion was quietly propping up the entire food supply. Here's the deeper pattern worth noticing. This wasn't wastefulness avoided out of tidiness. It was a survival philosophy, one where nothing biological was allowed to go unused because scarcity made waste a luxury nobody could afford. Every animal that fell became an entire toolkit, a pharmacy, a wardrobe, and a power source rolled into one. Your ancestors weren't just eating. They were engineering an entire civilization out of the raw materials standing in front of them. Somewhere between 10 and 40,000 years ago, something shifted that would rewire the entire trajectory of human civilization. And it happened slowly, messily, with plenty of trial and error, most of it probably ending in a bite mark. Humans stopped only chasing animals and started keeping them. The dog came first. Wolves that lingered near human camps, tolerating people, got tolerated in return, and over generations that uneasy truce became partnership. A dog's sense of smell operates on a level so far beyond human capability that having one nearby was like carrying a biological alarm system that could also track prey through terrain no human eye could read. Groups with dogs simply outcompeted groups without them, and that gap in survival odds was enormous. Next came goats and sheep, roughly 10,000 years ago. If your ancestors had designed the perfect survival animal in a lab, it might have looked exactly like a goat. Hardy, able to eat almost anything, and generous with milk, meat, hide, and horn all at once. Milk deserves special attention here because it introduced something genuinely new to human economics: a renewable food source. You didn't have to kill the animal to benefit from it, which meant your food supply and your wealth could grow at the same time, instead of one depleting the other. But there's a domestication story that rarely gets told, and it didn't involve humans choosing an animal at all. It's the cat. Around 7,500 years ago, in the same regions where humans first began storing surplus grain, that grain attracted swarms of rodents, and rodents attracted wildcats. The cats weren't tamed by deliberate human effort the way dogs or goats were. They essentially domesticated themselves, drawn in by an easy food source, and humans simply let them stay because a self-employed pest control system was too useful to chase away. It's the only major domestication story where the animal, not the human, made the first move. Then came cattle, and here the story gets almost unbelievable. Genetic research tracing the ancestry of nearly all modern domestic cattle back to their wild ancestor, the aurochs, found that the founding population was shockingly small, possibly numbering only in the dozens. Every hamburger, every glass of milk, every leather jacket on the planet today traces back through an almost impossibly narrow genetic bottleneck. One small herd, domesticated in one region, went on to reshape agriculture, economies, and diets across the entire globe. But if you had to crown a single domesticated animal as the most transformative in human history, it would be the horse, tamed on the Eurasian steppe roughly 5,500 years ago. And its impact wasn't gradual. It was immediate and total. Warfare changed first. An army on foot might cover 25 kilometers on a good day, Mounted forces, like the Mongol cavalry centuries later, could reportedly triple or quadruple that at full pace. This didn't just speed things up, it rewrote the entire logic of military strategy, supply lines, and surprise attacks, and it quietly decided which civilizations would rise and which would be steamrolled. The chariot, essentially a weapons platform on wheels, functioned as the ancient world's tank, and the empires that mastered it dominated for over 1,000 years. Trade and governance transformed too. Before the horse, information and goods moved at walking speed, which put a hard ceiling on how large an empire could realistically get. You simply couldn't govern land that took weeks to reach. The horse collapsed that distance. Roads like the Persian royal route, stretching well over 2,000 kilometers, only made practical sense once riders could actually use them efficiently. And then there was agriculture. Draft horses could pull a plow through soil faster and more efficiently than oxen ever could, which meant more land farmed by the same number of people. More land meant more food meant more people, and more people meant, eventually, more civilization. There's something almost psychological buried in all of this too. Humans are not fast animals. No claws, no venom, nothing built for speed. But put a person on a horse and suddenly a slow, vulnerable creature becomes something that can outrun almost anything alive. There are historical accounts of people who had never seen a horse before reacting with genuine terror at the sight of mounted riders, some convinced they were witnessing a single impossible creature rather than two separate beings working as one. Now for the dependencies that never make it into the dramatic version of history. No mammoth hunts, no cavalry charges, just small creatures quietly holding entire civilizations together. Start with bees. It's tempting to assume humans valued them purely for honey, and sure, honey is wonderful, but that's barely scratching the surface. Beeswax turned out to be one of the most versatile materials in the ancient toolkit. It waterproofed wood. It lubricated early machinery. It burned in candles that outlasted animal fat lamps. It formed the base for medicinal ointments, and it coated the wax tablets that functioned as the ancient world's version of scratch paper, the backbone of record keeping before anyone had access to mass-produced paper. Honey itself carried a property that borders on strange. It essentially never spoils. Archaeologists have recovered honey from Egyptian tombs, thousands of years old, that remained perfectly edible. In a world constantly fighting against food that rotted, spoiled, or attracted pests within days, a food source that could sit indefinitely without decay felt almost supernatural. Egyptians also applied it directly to wounds, and modern research has confirmed genuine antimicrobial properties in raw honey. They were using a functioning antiseptic thousands of years before anyone had identified what bacteria even were. Then there's an even smaller creature responsible for one of history's most consequential trade networks, the silkworm. A caterpillar spinning thread strong and fine enough to weave into fabric, so prized that merchants would travel thousands of kilometers just to trade for it. That single insect gave rise to the Silk Road, a route that didn't just move fabric. It carried ideas, belief systems, mathematics, and diseases between civilizations that would otherwise have had almost no contact at all for well over 1,000 years. Birds solved a different problem entirely: distance. Long before telegraph wires or radio waves, a message needed a body to carry it, and pigeons could cover ground no runner ever could. Military commanders relied on them to coordinate troops. Merchants used them to move price information faster than their competitors could react. Even into the 20th century, a pigeon named Cher Ami carried a message that saved nearly 200 trapped soldiers, delivered despite being shot through mid-flight. A bird, quite literally, saving 200 human lives by doing exactly what it was bred to do. And then the animals that get almost zero credit, despite being the literal machinery of ancient construction: oxen and donkeys. Every massive stone hauled to build a temple, every harvest carried from field to storehouse, every heavy timber dragged toward a half-finished ship, all of it moved because of these unglamorous, overlooked animals, functioning as the trucks and cranes of the ancient world, Given how completely survival depended on all of this, it makes sense that humans didn't just use animals. They elevated them into something sacred. When your entire existence rests on something, admiration alone doesn't feel like enough. You mythologize it. In ancient Egypt, gods wore animal heads for a reason. The jackal represented the boundary between life and death, the falcon symbolized sharp-eyed royal power, and the bull was worshipped as a living deity because cattle were simply that central to survival. In parts of India, cattle remain sacred today, and what looks like pure religious tradition to outsiders was originally rooted in economic logic. Killing a cow that produces milk, labor, and fertilizer indefinitely made about as much sense as burning your house down for one night of warmth. Norse mythology gave Odin two ravens representing thought and memory, a kind of mythological intelligence network built from birds, fitting for a culture that understood information as a form of power. And for Plains cultures in North America, the buffalo sat at the absolute center of spiritual and material life, providing food, shelter, tools, and meaning simultaneously, which is exactly why its mass slaughter in the 19th century functioned as more than an ecological disaster. It was a calculated blow aimed at the very foundation of an entire way of life. Today, that dependency has mostly vanished from view. Food arrives wrapped in plastic. Light comes from a switch on the wall. It's entirely possible to live an entire life without ever directly relying on an animal for survival. But that disconnection is startlingly recent. A thin sliver of time layered on top of roughly 300,000 years, where every single one of your ancestors lived in constant, direct negotiation with the animals around them. So the next time you're warm, fed, and comfortable enough to think about something other than immediate survival, it's worth remembering what that comfort is actually built on. The first alliance humans ever formed wasn't with each other. It was with animals. And in the most literal sense possible, that alliance is the reason you exist at all.